Hey everyone, hope you all are doing well. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some introductory concerns for what ethics is. Okay, now the first thing we need to get down is this distinction. The distinction between descriptive ethics on the one side and prescriptive ethics on the other. Um, Sometimes in conversation, it can be confusing whether all we're doing is being descriptive about something or whether we're actually attempting to be prescriptive. Okay, now, so on the descriptive side of things, descriptive ethics only concerns people's actual behaviors, people's actual moral beliefs, and people's actual convictions. So when you're talking about ethics descriptively, you're not making any kind of value judgments whatsoever. So, descriptive ethics does not involve claims about anything being right or wrong, anything being good or evil, anything being blameworthy or praiseworthy. That is all the prescriptive side of things. So, if all you're doing is just talking about how people actually do behave in certain circumstances or what people's actual moral beliefs and moral convictions are or people's own personal moralities and things like that. You're just talking about things on the descriptive side. You're not being prescriptive. Now, here's why this can be somewhat confusing. Suppose I ask a question like, is lying morally wrong? This is a prescriptive question. I'm asking about the moral status of a certain kind of act, the act of lying. Okay, now it's common for individuals when they are asked these kinds of questions potentially to respond in these kinds of ways. Okay, well, people lie all the time, right? So I ask you, is lying morally wrong? And you say, well, people lie all the time. Or it depends on your morals. Or not everyone agrees that lying is wrong. Or not everyone agrees that lying is wrong under certain kinds of circumstances, so on and so forth. Okay, now, but notice what's happening here. I've asked you a prescriptive question. I've asked you a question about the actual moral status of a certain kind of act, whether that act is right or wrong. And you're now answering me with just descriptive aspects. So the fact that people lie all the time, the fact that people have disagreements about the moral status of lying, and the fact that people might have personal moralities or convictions which lend them to think in certain ways about certain kinds of actions, all of that is irrelevant to the question. So the fact that people do actually engage in certain kinds of behaviors, that doesn't tell you anything at all about whether those kinds of behaviors are right or wrong. The fact that people disagree on what the moral facts are, it doesn't follow from that there are no moral facts, and it certainly doesn't follow from that everyone just kind of creates their own set of moral facts, and what's wrong is wrong for you and what's right is right for me. The fact that people align themselves with their own moral convictions quite often, and people talk about their own personal morals and things like that's neither here nor there with respect to what the actual prescriptive facts are. Okay, so prescriptive ethics, on the other hand, concerns how people ought to behave, such that individuals, when they behave in certain kinds of ways, are capable of doing right or wrong, are capable of being morally responsible, are capable for being either blameworthy or praiseworthy for the ways in which they behave. Now, and if we talk about moral convictions and moral beliefs, on the prescriptive side of things, we're concerned with the kinds of convictions and beliefs that individuals ought to have, not the kinds of convictions and beliefs that individuals just actually do have. So we're going to be open to the possibility that it's possible for individuals to be mistaken in their own convictions. It's possible for individuals to be mistaken in their moral beliefs. Now, but if that is possible, if it's possible for individuals to be mistaken in their moral beliefs, and it's also possible for individuals, to uh, be mistaken in how they understand the nature of right and wrong, well, that also leaves open the possibility that some individuals may be more morally informed than others. But if both of those things are possible, then that means right and wrong aren't determined by what we just happen to believe about it. If what's right and what's wrong were just determined by what you believe about it, then it would be impossible for you to be mistaken. It would be impossible for other individuals to be more morally informed than you are. So if you are open to the possibility that you could be mistaken in your moral convictions and your moral views, well, that means that we don't all just create our own set of moral facts that we just occupy, right? Because it would then be impossible to be mistaken. Okay, now, along with this conversation is how we understand the nature of moral theories. All right, so what is a theory in general? So theories are bodies of explanations from which we can make novel predictions. So this understanding of a theory is pretty prevalent in philosophy of science, but for our purposes, it works just fine. So, whereas with natural theories, we are trying to explain natural events and phenomena, with moral theories, we are trying to explain moral events and phenomena. So, what we want our moral theories to do, predictively, is make recommendations about what kinds of actions would be right and would be wrong under certain kinds of circumstances. We want our theories to explain as much relevant phenomena as possible. So if there's a certain kind of moral phenomena out there that a given moral theory doesn't really address, that's a knock against the theory. So if there's something out there that a theory ought to explain or should explain that it actually does not explain, that is an indication that you have the wrong theory. Okay. Now, but as far as desirable components of our theories, right? So first and foremost, we want our theories to be simple. Okay, so simplicity is not only a desirable component for scientific theories, simplicity is also a desirable component for moral theories. Now, why? When we talk about simplicity, we're talking about the number of theoretical facts, or in our case, rules and principles that are postulated or advocated by the theory. Now, the reason why simplicity is a value for our theories is not only that our simpler theories are often easier to comprehend, it's also the case that simpler theories are more likely to be true. So, why is it that simpler theories are more likely to be true? Simpler theories are more likely to be true because there's a lower number of conditions that need to come together in the right kind of way to make the theory true. So, more complex theories have more sort of interrelated parts and things like that, and the parts need to come together in the right kind of way, and the scope of the theory might potentially be larger. Well, that automatically makes the theory less likely to be true given its complexity. Now, it also means that more complex theories are going to require a higher degree of evidence or reasons to substantiate as opposed to simpler theories. So, simpler theories are not always the true theory, but in general, simpler theories are more likely to be true based on the fact that they postulate a limited complexity as opposed to a more complex theory. Okay, secondly, we also want our theories to be comprehensive. So, the comprehensiveness of a theory is what we would call its scope, or how much the theory actually captures under its umbrella. So sometimes there's a trade-off between simplicity and comprehensiveness. So simpler theories might be initially more likely to be true, but complex theories might have a greater degree of comprehensiveness. They might be more comprehensive because they can capture more relevant phenomena under that umbrella, if you want to use that term. Okay, and then last but not least, we want our theories to be coherent. We want our theories to fit with other things that we either know or reasonably believe about the world. Okay, so for example, if you have a moral theory, for example, that says that non-human animals are not included in the moral community because non-human animals are incapable of feeling pain. Well, how well does that jive with contemporary scientific theories about animal sentience and things like that? So if you have a theory which has part of its aspect, the claim that non-human animals have no moral standing whatsoever, based on the fact that only human beings can feel pain or only human beings psychologically are complex kinds of beings, well, that doesn't jive very well with what our best sort of biological and neuroscientific theories of the world tell us. The more we are discovering about biology and neuroscience and things like that, the number of sentient beings in the world is not going down; it's actually going up. Our current scientific body of evidence tells us no, that a lot of non-human animals have incredibly rich psychological lives, not to the same extent that human beings do, but it at least seems pretty obvious that non-human animals are capable of feeling pain, at least. Okay, now, so the first theoretical area of ethics we're going to talk about in some detail is this. It is known as meta-ethics. So meta-ethics is the area of theoretical ethics that deals with the nature of moral facts. So there are two important questions in this area. So the first kind of question is, do moral facts exist? So do moral facts exist at all? And if moral facts exist, what kinds of things are they? So if there are existing moral facts, what are they like? Now, an individual who answers the first question negatively would be advocating some sort of moral nihilism. So, moral nihilism is the position that there are no moral facts or genuine moral features to the world at all. So, according to the moral nihilist, nothing is right or wrong, nothing is good or evil. We are never morally responsible for our actions. Nothing that we do is ever morally blameworthy or praiseworthy, so on and so forth. Somebody who answers the first question affirmatively would be advocating some kind of moral realism. So, moral nihilism would be the position that moral facts do not exist at all and the world has no genuine moral features or properties. Moral realism is the position that no, there are moral facts do exist, and the world does have genuine moral features and properties and things like this. Now, if you are sitting there wondering whether or not you are a nihilist or a realist, well, just ask yourself this question. Is there anything morally wrong with lighting 2-year-old children on fire for fun? If you answer yes to that question, there is something wrong with lighting 2-year-old children on fire for fun. If you think the answer to that question is yes, you're a realist. You're not a nihilist. In order for any of our moral sentences to be true, there have to be existing moral facts. You can't have truth without facts. So if at least some of our moral sentences are true, that means that there are existing moral facts. So if you think it's true that it's wrong to light 2-year-old children on fire for fun, you are a moral realist. You are not a moral nihilist. I mean, so take that as a litmus test. Okay, now, as far as the nature of moral facts themselves, some individuals advocate moral objectivism. So, moral objectivism is the position that moral facts are mind independent entities. To say that moral facts are mind independent means that moral facts do not depend for their existence on any human minds or the activities of any human minds and the like. So, if there are existing moral facts, the facts are what they are, regardless of what any human being says or thinks or desires or wills to be the case. So, the facts themselves, what makes actions right and wrong, those kinds of facts do not depend upon us. So again, if it's wrong to light 2-year-old children on fire for fun, the fact that makes it wrong, that has nothing to do with what we feel about it, what we think about it, what we know about it, what we desire about it. It's wrong, and there's some mind independent fact that makes it the case that it is wrong. Now, other realists are moral subjectivists. Moral subjectivism is the position that moral facts are mind dependent entities. Okay, now it's here that there's a little bit of confusion. To say that moral facts are subjective is not the same thing as saying that moral facts are relative, meaning that they vary from person to person or from culture to culture. You can, at least in principle, you can have a set of subjective facts that are nevertheless universal. So to say that a given fact is subjective just means that it depends for its existence on at least one mind. So if you think about what we call social facts, facts about borders, facts about money, facts about institutions of higher education, facts about social media, and the like. These are all socially constructed. These are all subjective facts, but it doesn't make sense to say that they vary from person to person. Okay, so Joe Biden is currently president of the United States. That is a subjective fact. So the fact that Joe Biden is president of the United States, that fact is entirely dependent upon human activities and mental states, human desires and beliefs, and so on and so forth. If there were no human minds, there would be no such thing as the office of the presidency. So it's a subjective fact that Joe Biden is president of the United States, but it's not a relative fact. It wouldn't make any sense for an individual to say, well, Joe Biden may be president in your world, but he's not president in my world. No, we occupy the same world. So it is true for every individual on the planet that Joe Biden is the current president of the United States. But it's still a subjective fact, it's a social fact. So social facts are subjective facts, but social facts can be universal. So moral relativism, whether it's sort of an individualistic relativism or a cultural relativism, these are subjective views of morality, but you don't have to be a relativist either in the individualistic kind or the cultural kind in order to be a moral subjectivism or in order to be a moral subjectivist. So relativism is a version of subjectivism, but not all versions of subjectivism are relativistic in that sense. You can have socially constructed subjective facts that are nevertheless universal in their scope. Okay, the next area of theoretical ethics is normativity. So this is really the bulk of what any kind of moral theory is going to be talking about. So this is the area of theoretical ethics that deals with explanations about what makes actions right and wrong. Okay, so this area of theoretical ethics deals with conditions of moral responsibility, conditions of moral blame, moral justification, and moral excuse, so on and so forth. So if certain actions are right under certain kinds of circumstances, what is it that makes them right? If certain kinds of actions are wrong under specific circumstances, what is it exactly that makes them wrong? Okay, now, so here I'm getting some shade from Alanis Morissette, but that's fine. Here I'm going to talk briefly about the concept of moral blame, just because for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to be talking about moral permissibility and moral obligation in terms of moral blame. Okay, say goodbye to Alanis Morissette, because she's just telling you it's all your fault, right? So to say that a given action or a person is morally blameworthy just means that an individual would be justified in having an attitude of outrage or condemnation or disgust. So persons or actions are morally blameworthy just in case an individual would be justified in having an attitude of condemnation, outrage, or disgust towards that person or action, or at least would be justified in expressing that the action warrants or the person warrants condemnation, outrage, or disgust. Now, notice it says would be justified. It doesn't say is justified. So what does that mean? That means you can be blameworthy for an action even if nobody actually blames you for it, or nobody actually sees you doing it, or nobody actually condemns you for it, or nobody actually thinks that you've done something wrong. So the conditions that make an action blameworthy doesn't depend upon whether anybody actually blames you or actually condemns you or is actually disgusted by your action. Okay, now It's also important to point out that the condemnation or outrage or disgust actually has to be justified. So there's a difference here between being disgusted by something and then actually having legitimate or justified disgust or outrage. Okay, you can be outraged or disgusted by just about anything, but just because you actually are outraged or just because you are actually disgusted, it doesn't follow from that that your outrage or disgust or your condemnation is actually justified. So, in order for your disgust or outrage or condemnation to be justified, there has to be some kind of morally sufficient reason for your attitude of outrage or disgust or condemnation. Okay, now, so how does this tie in with questions about what's morally permissible and what's morally obligatory? Okay, so to say that an act is permissible just means you would not be blameworthy for performing the act. And likewise, refraining from performing an act is permissible just in case you would not be blameworthy for failing to perform an act. So you can be permitted to act in certain ways. You can also be permitted to refrain from acting in certain kinds of ways. So an action is permissible if you would not be blameworthy for performing the action, and refraining from performing an action is permissible just in case you would not be blameworthy for failing to act. Now, obligation, to say that an act is obligatory means you would be blameworthy for failing to perform that action. So if you're obligated to act and you fail to act, you are blameworthy for failing to act. Likewise, you are morally obligated to refrain from acting, just in case you would be morally blameworthy for acting. Now, so one way of capturing this is talking about positive obligations versus negative obligations. So with positive obligations, there's something you actually need to do. There's an actual task you need to perform or act you need to perform in order to fulfill an obligation. So this would involve some sort of active promotion on your part. Now, your negative obligations, you can satisfy your negative ones just by going about your business and leaving people the hell alone. So if you avoided punching somebody in the face today for no good reason, well, good job. You fulfilled a negative obligation. You just let people be. You just leave people to their own business, and they mind their own business when it comes to you. Hey, those are all negative obligations that we satisfy on almost a daily basis. Okay, and then the last sort of area of theoretical ethics is known as value theory. And there's a separate video on this, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But value theory is the area of theoretical ethics that deals with questions and concerns about what's intrinsically good or intrinsically desirable. So questions about what is desirable for its own sake, questions about just what is fundamentally good, and questions about what has inherent worth, if anything does. These are all areas that get covered in value theory. Okay, and like I said, since there's a separate video on value theory, I'm just going to leave this here for now. So as always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to email me, and I'll see you all soon.